Imagine walking into a store you built from nothing, your dream, your success, only to be treated like a criminal. Monique Evans, a self-made entrepreneur, enters her luxury boutique to check on her business. But within minutes, a racist store manager assumes she doesn't belong. Without asking questions, he accuses her of theft, calls security, and watches her get arrested in her own store. He smirks, thinking he's done the right thing. But when the truth about Monique's identity is revealed, his world shatters. This isn't just a story about racism. It's about karma striking hard. Keep watching, because this manager is about to regret everything. Racism hides in plain sight, often disguised as policy, authority, or so-called good intentions. But what happens when the very prejudice meant to put someone down backfires in the worst way? Today's story will leave you stunned. A successful black businesswoman walks into her own store, only to be humiliated, handcuffed, and thrown out by a manager who assumes she's a thief. But when the truth comes out, the look on his face is priceless. Stay tuned. This is a lesson he'll never forget. This isn't just a story about racism. It's about karma catching up in real time. You'll want to stick around to see how a woman who was wrongfully humiliated turns the tables in the most powerful way. The moment the manager realizes his mistake, pure shock, and the way Monique handles it, absolutely legendary. If you've ever been underestimated, disrespected, or judged unfairly, this story will hit home. Trust me, you won't want to miss how it all unfolds. Monique Evans had built her luxury boutique from the ground up. It wasn't just a store. It was a symbol of her perseverance, intelligence, and hard work. Located in an upscale district, the boutique catered to high-end clients, offering designer pieces and exclusive collections. On this particular afternoon, Monique decided to stop by unannounced to check on operations. She walked in, taking in the elegant decor, the well-organized displays, and the subtle fragrance of expensive perfumes in the air. Everything was exactly how she had envisioned it. But the moment she stepped inside, she noticed something strange. The store manager, Ethan Wallace, stood behind the counter, his sharp, judging eyes locked onto her as if she had no business being there. His posture stiffened, and his lips curled slightly in disapproval. Monique, dressed casually in jeans and a blazer, walked toward a display of handbags, admiring the latest arrival she had personally selected. Before she could even reach out to touch one, Ethan stepped forward, blocking her path. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Monique smiled politely. "Just browsing," she replied. Ethan's eyes flickered down to her handbag, then back up to her face. His lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't allow loitering in here." Monique raised an eyebrow. "Loitering? In my own store?" She let out a soft chuckle, thinking maybe he had simply made a mistake. "I'm not loitering. I just wanted to look around." Ethan didn't budge. "We've had issues with shoplifting lately," he said, his voice colder now, "and I can't take any risks." Monique's stomach tightened. "Risks?" She took a deep breath, still trying to remain calm. "Are you accusing me of stealing?" Ethan folded his arms, his expression unwavering. "Let's just say I've seen you in here before, and every time something goes missing." The accusation hit like a slap. Customers were starting to look over, whispering among themselves. Employees shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do. Monique's heart pounded, but she refused to let this man intimidate her. "Do you have proof of that?" she asked, her voice steady. Ethan smirked. "I don't need proof. I trust my instincts. And my instincts tell me you don't belong here." Monique's patience was running thin. "Do you even know who I am?" Ethan scoffed. "I know exactly who you are. You're someone who needs to leave before I call security." Monique's jaw clenched. This was beyond insulting. It was infuriating. But before she could say another word, Ethan reached for his phone and dialed security. "Yeah, I need you to come to the store immediately," he said. "We've got a problem." A problem. Monique couldn't believe what was happening. She wasn't just being racially profiled. She was being treated like a criminal in her own establishment. She glanced at the employees behind the counter, searching for recognition in their eyes. But none of them spoke up. Either they were too afraid to challenge Ethan, or they genuinely didn't know who she was. Minutes later, 2 security guards stormed into the boutique. Ethan pointed at Monique, his face twisted with arrogance. "That's her," he said. "She's been stealing from my store." His store. The audacity. Monique took a deep breath, trying to contain the fire burning inside her. "This is a mistake," she said firmly. "I haven't stolen anything." One of the guards stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to come with us." Monique shook her head. "You don't understand." Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You thought you could just waltz in here, take whatever you wanted, and walk out without consequences. Not today." Monique's hands balled into fists. This man has no idea what he's doing. Customers were staring. Some were whispering, others were pulling out their phones, recording the scene unfolding before them. Ethan turned to the security guards. "Well, what are you waiting for? Get her out of here." And just like that, without asking for proof, without checking security footage, without giving her a chance to defend herself, Monique Evans, the owner of the store, was grabbed by the arms and escorted out like a common criminal. As the doors swung shut behind her, she could hear Ethan's satisfied voice. "That's what happens when you try to steal from me." Monique clenched her jaw, staring at the glass doors of her own boutique. This wasn't over. Not even close. Monique stood outside her own store, humiliated, angry, and in complete disbelief. The cool afternoon air felt suffocating as the 2 security guards kept a firm grip on her arms, treating her as if she were some common thief. Customers inside continued to stare, their phones still raised, capturing every moment. Some whispered in shock, while others just watched, silent spectators to an injustice unfolding in real time. She wanted to scream, to tell them all the truth, but she knew better. Monique Evans wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a strategist, and right now, the best thing she could do was wait for the right moment to strike. But Ethan Wallace? He was reveling in the moment. Standing inside the boutique, arms crossed, he watched the scene unfold with a smirk. This was his store, his rules, and in his mind, he had just handled a problem. "You people always think you can get away with things," Ethan muttered under his breath. Monique's sharp ears caught the words, her blood boiling. "You people?" The phrase was laced with arrogance and the kind of entitlement that made her stomach turn. One of the security guards spoke. "Ma'am, you're being detained until the police arrive." Her head snapped toward him. "The police?" "Store policy," the guard responded. "We have to report all theft incidents." Monique let out a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She had spent years building this business. She had fought to be taken seriously in a world that underestimated Black women at every turn. And now, she was being arrested for existing in a space she had created. Customers were still watching, some recording, some whispering. A few looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. No one challenged what was happening. That's when Monique realized this wasn't just about her. This was about every Black person who had ever been wrongly accused. Every person who had been judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. And she wasn't going to let this slide. Ethan walked up to the security guards, fake concern dripping from his voice. "Did she put up a fight?" Monique turned to him, her voice like ice. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" Ethan rolled his eyes. "Oh, I know exactly who you are." Another nobody who thought she could outsmart the system. Her lips curled into a dangerous smirk. "We'll see about that." Just then, a police car pulled up, sirens off but lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, looking around before approaching the guards. "What's the situation?" one officer asked. Ethan stepped forward, his chest puffed out as if he had just performed some heroic act. "Caught her red-handed," he said proudly. "She's been lurking around here for weeks. Always sneaking in, always eyeing the merchandise. Today, she tried to make a move, and I finally stopped her." The officers turned to Monique. One of them raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Monique inhaled deeply, keeping her composure. "Yes," she said coolly. "I'd like to speak to my lawyer. And while you're at it, maybe check who actually owns this store." Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "Owns this store? Oh, that's rich." The officers exchanged glances. Something in Monique's confidence made them hesitate. They weren't dealing with a typical suspect. Identification? One of the officers asked. Monique looked at the guards. They took my bag when they detained me. My ID is inside. One of the guards hesitated before handing over her purse. The officer retrieved her ID, glancing at it, then pausing. His eyes widened slightly before he turned it toward his partner. Silence. A long, painful silence. Ethan's smirk started to falter. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Arrest her already." The officer's gaze lifted from the ID, slowly locking onto Ethan. Then, with a voice laced in disbelief, he read aloud. Monique Evans, owner and CEO of Evans Luxury Boutique. The entire street fell silent. Ethan's face went pale. What? Monique's smirk deepened. Surprise. The crowd, once just passive onlookers, exploded into murmurs. Employees inside the store gasped. Customers whispered in shock. The security guards stiffened, their grips on Monique loosening as realization set in. The officers looked at each other before turning back to Monique. "Ma'am, we sincerely apologize for this mistake." Monique adjusted her blazer, shaking off the last bit of humiliation like dust from her shoulders. "Oh, I know you do." But the true satisfaction? That came when Ethan stumbled back, shaking his head, his confidence shattering in real time. This has to be some kind of joke," he sputtered. "She's lying." One of the officers held up her ID. "Sir, this is government-issued identification. And according to the records, this woman owns everything inside that store, including your employment contract." Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The power dynamic had flipped. The man who had so confidently humiliated Monique in front of dozens of people was now realizing that he had just insulted and arrested the one person in the world who could end him. And Monique? She wasn't done yet. She turned to the officers. "I appreciate you handling this professionally, but I'd still like to press charges for false accusations, defamation, and unlawful detainment." The officer nodded. "Understood, ma'am." Ethan's face drained of color. "Wait, what?" Monique met his terrified eyes. "Oh, did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" Ethan's hands started to shake. "I was just doing my job." Monique tilted her head. "No, Ethan, you were abusing your power. And now? You're about to lose everything." The realization hit him like a brick wall. And the crowd? They loved every second of it. Ethan's face twisted in horror as reality crashed down on him. He had just accused, humiliated, and had the owner of the store dragged out in handcuffs. And now, she was pressing charges. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, with some people shaking their heads in disgust. Customers who had once admired the boutique's exclusivity were now whispering about the racism they had just witnessed. Employees inside the store exchanged nervous glances, realizing that their manager had made a catastrophic mistake. One of the officers turned to Ethan. "Sir, you just falsely accused your employer of theft. That's a serious allegation." Ethan's arrogance evaporated. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His eyes darted toward Monique, who stood tall and composed, a stark contrast to his unraveling demeanor. "Ma'am," the officer continued, "do you want to press charges now, or would you like to handle this privately?" Monique's gaze remained locked on Ethan. A part of her wanted to drag this out, to make him feel every ounce of the humiliation he had inflicted on her. But another part of her knew that the best revenge wasn't just legal action. It was making sure that he could never do this to anyone else. "For now," she said smoothly, "I'd like a private conversation with him. Inside. In my office." Ethan's head snapped up. Wait. You're still on my payroll, aren't you?" she interrupted. "Or have you already fired yourself?" The crowd erupted into soft laughter, and Ethan's face burned red. With no other choice, he followed Monique inside, his confidence in shambles. The boutique's atmosphere had completely changed. Employees who once looked to Ethan for direction now avoided his gaze. Customers whispered behind racks of clothing, some recording from a distance. Monique led the way to her office, pushing open the door and stepping inside. Ethan hesitated for a second before following, the tension in the air suffocating. As soon as the door shut, Monique turned to him. Sit. Ethan hesitated. Sit, she repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. He sank into the chair, his hands gripping the armrests as if they were the only things keeping him from falling apart. Monique leaned against her desk, crossing her arms. Tell me, Ethan, how long have you worked here? He swallowed hard. 1.5 years. And in that time, how many times have you falsely accused someone of theft? His lips parted, but no words came. How many times have you assumed that someone didn't belong here just because of how they looked? She pressed. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to protect the store. Monique let out a short, humorless laugh. Protect it? From the woman who built it? He lowered his head, but she wasn't done. You didn't just embarrass me today, she continued, her voice sharp. You embarrassed this entire business. Do you know how fast word spreads? Do you realize what this kind of scandal does to a brand's reputation? Ethan's breath came in short, panicked bursts. I wasn't thinking. No, you weren't, Monique cut in. Because if you had been, you would have realized that the woman you had arrested was the one signing your paychecks. Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. Monique stepped forward. Do you know what the worst part is? He barely managed to shake his head. You didn't even hesitate, she said. You saw a black woman in casual clothes, and your first instinct was that she didn't belong. Not once did you ask for identification. Not once did you consider the possibility that I was a customer, let alone the owner. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. I can fix this. Monique raised an eyebrow. Can you? His nod was frantic. Yes. I'll apologize publicly. I'll make a statement. I'll tell everyone that it was a misunderstanding. Monique sighed. Oh, Ethan, this isn't something a simple apology can fix. His face paled even more. So, what happens now? She studied him for a moment. Then, calmly, she reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a folder, and placed it in front of him. Your termination papers. Ethan's mouth fell open. Wait, no. You can't. I can. And I just did. His hands shook as he opened the folder, scanning the papers inside. But I need this job. Monique tilted her head. And I needed respect in my own store. But here we are. Tears welled in his eyes. Please. I'll do better. I swear. Just give me another chance. She considered him for a moment, then let out a breath. You want another chance? He nodded rapidly. Yes. Anything. Then go out there and own what you did, she said. Not a scripted apology. Not some PR stunt. Go out there and admit that you let your bias control your actions. That you falsely accused me. That you humiliated your own boss without ever stopping to think. Ethan swallowed hard. And if I do? She leaned in slightly. Then maybe, just maybe, I'll consider letting you leave with your dignity instead of dragging this through the courts. Ethan wiped his face, nodded, and stood. His legs were shaky as he walked toward the door, but Monique didn't stop him. As he stepped back into the store, every eye was on him. And now? He had to face the very people who had witnessed his downfall. Ethan stepped out of the office, his face pale and his hands trembling. The air in the store felt heavier than before, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on him. Every customer, every employee. Everyone was waiting for his next move. He had no way out. His throat felt dry as he stepped toward the center of the store, clearing his throat. Everyone, can I have your attention? The murmurs quieted, but the tension remained. Cameras were still rolling, phones still pointed at him. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. I made a terrible mistake today, he said, voice shaking. I falsely accused someone of theft. Not just anyone, but the owner of this store, Monique Evans. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people exchanged looks of disbelief, while others simply nodded, already aware of the truth. Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. I let my biases cloud my judgment. I assumed, without question, that she didn't belong here. And for that, I am deeply sorry. Monique watched from the office doorway, arms crossed. She could tell the apology wasn't easy for him. He was a man who had thrived on power, and now he was being forced to dismantle his own authority in front of everyone. I humiliated my own boss, Ethan continued. I embarrassed this company, and I showed exactly why so many people don't feel safe in places that should welcome them. A woman in the crowd scoffed. You think an apology is enough? Ethan flinched but nodded. No, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve a second chance. But I wanted to admit what I did, publicly, because no one should ever go through what Monique went through today. Monique stepped forward then, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The store fell into silence as she walked past Ethan and turned to the crowd. Thank you all for being here, she said, her voice strong and unwavering. What happened today wasn't just about me. It was about something much bigger, about the assumptions people make, about who gets treated with respect and who doesn't. A young black woman in the crowd nodded. Stuff like this happens all the time, just usually not to someone with power. Monique met her gaze. Exactly. And that's why I won't let this slide. Ethan Wallace has been terminated, effective immediately. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some nodded in approval. Others just looked relieved. But firing one man doesn't fix the problem, Monique continued. So from this moment forward, my company will be launching a full-scale diversity and inclusion training program. We will be reviewing our hiring policies, our security protocols, and everything else that contributed to what happened today. Applause erupted. Some employees even let out small cheers. Ethan, standing off to the side, looked completely defeated. He had lost everything in a matter of minutes: his job, his reputation, and any shred of authority he once had. He took a shaky breath, turned toward Monique, and muttered, I'm sorry. She studied him for a long moment, then simply said, I hope you learn from this. With that, she turned away, walking toward the exit as the crowd parted for her. The cameras were still rolling, the entire ordeal captured for the world to see. And by the time she stepped outside, her phone was already buzzing with notifications. The video had gone viral. News outlets were picking up the story. People were calling for Ethan to never work in management again. Some even wanted him arrested for false accusations. Monique sighed as she looked at her phone. She hadn't set out to make headlines today. She had only wanted to check on her store. But now, she had become the face of something much bigger, and she was ready to use her voice to make sure this never happened to anyone else. What started as a humiliating arrest ended as a powerful moment of justice. Monique Evans didn't just clear her name. She exposed a deeply rooted problem and took action to ensure change. Ethan Wallace thought he could wield his power unchecked, but he learned the hard way that prejudice carries consequences. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about holding people accountable, breaking stereotypes, and demanding respect where it's long been denied. If you believe in standing against injustice, share this story. And if you want more powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Robert's Story, because the truth always deserves to be told.